praise from Pope Francis. The Holy Father completes his first apostolic trip of 2022, a visit to majority Catholic Malta. We have a report from Rome. Supreme Court. Lawmakers take the next steps in the confirmation process of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're on Capitol Hill. Global politics. A European nation re-elects a president while a nuclear power dissolves its parliament. And healing intercession. How the faithful in one Latin American country are thanking the patron saint of ailing pets. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, April 4th, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of St. Isidore, a doctor of the church. I'm Tracy Sable. We begin tonight with a disturbing story from our nation's capital. The remains of at least 5 aborted babies were found last week at the home of a progressive anti-abortion activist. Authorities are now investigating. The source of the remains is not clear. The activist group is holding a press conference tomorrow to explain. Our partners are also covering this story, and you can read more right now at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Meantime, Pope Francis is back in Rome following a 2-day trip to Malta. It was his first apostolic journey of 2022. While there, he reminded the faithful that in Christ, a new and improved life is always possible.
Non c'è peccato che non possa andare in questa strada. Dio perdona tutto.
During Mass in front of a crowd of thousands of people, the Holy Father urged attendees to be, quote, tireless witnesses of God's mercy. Pope Francis also made news on his flight back to Rome, where the 85-year-old discussed the situation in Ukraine and his own health. Joining us now from Rome is Courtney Mares, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Courtney, great to see you. I know that you were on the Papal plane when Pope Francis gave that in-flight press conference. Talk to us more about that, and what did he tell journalists?
Thank you, Tracy. The first question that came up in the press conference on the Papal plane last night was about the Pope's health. Pope Francis, who's now 85 years old, told us he had problems walking due to an issue with his knee. This was Pope Francis's first trip of 2022, after the Pope canceled a trip to Florence and other public appearances due to his ongoing knee pain. And it was clear to see throughout this trip to Malta that the Pope was having some trouble walking and that extra measures needed to be taken to accommodate the Pope's knee pain. For the first time in his pontificate, when the Pope landed on this trip, he did not walk down the stairs from the plane during the welcome ceremony. Instead, the Pope got on and off the plane using essentially what was a cargo lift. And another special lift was also installed at Malta's Basilica of St. Paul so that the Pope could pray in the Basilica's crypt grotto without having to take the stairs. With that said, despite the pain caused by his knee, the Pope still made an effort to walk down the aisle of the Papal plane to greet journalists. And he even took the time to stop and spent a moment with me in prayer, offering a prayer for my cousin Bobby, who is disabled. It was a beautiful moment and a personal encounter with the Pope that I will never forget.
What a wonderful, wonderful experience. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I want to go now and talk about, what happened on the ground in Malta for the Pope's first visit. Talk to us more about that.
The enthusiasm on the ground in Malta was palpable. Crowds of people of all ages lined the streets and waved Vatican flags wherever the Pope passed by in his Pope-mobile. And in recent years, Pope Francis has often opted to visit countries where Catholics are a small minority. So this trip was distinct because Malta traces its Catholic roots back nearly 2,000 years to when St. Paul was shipwrecked on the island and preached the gospel in Malta in about 60 AD, as is recorded in the Bible in the Acts of the Apostles. And a Maltese priest told me that he hopes that Pope Francis's trip to the island will help to reignite its living faith and inspire people to return to the sacraments after the pandemic. And this message was clear in the Pope's homilies, in which he repeated over and over that the joy of the Church is to evangelize and spread the gospel.
And Courtney, I love that you told us that story about you talking to Pope Francis and praying for your family member. But I also know that he had an emotional encounter with migrants yesterday at an immigration reception. on the Mediterranean island. Do you know why the Pope chose this moment to appeal again, for the world to be more open and welcoming to migrants?
As you know, like many on Pope Francis's trips to countries in the Mediterranean, a key theme of this trip was migration. And the Pope urged the local population to be welcoming to migrants and refugees from Africa and the Middle East that arrive on their shores. However, this trip was unique in that it happened in the context of the ongoing war in Ukraine, which was clearly on the Pope's mind throughout the weekend. The Pope met with Ukrainian refugees at the Vatican before heading to the airport. And then in his first public speech, as soon as he landed in Malta, the Pope, without mentioning Putin by name, alluded to Russian aggression by saying, "We thought that invasions of other countries and atomic threats were things of the past, but an infantile and destructive aggression has now been unleashed." When asked by journalists on the papal plane about whether Pope Francis would consider an invitation to visit Kyiv in an act of solidarity with the Ukrainian people, the Pope told us in reply that Kyiv is on the table, but he's not actually sure if a trip will be possible.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for bringing us this report today. We really appreciate it. Courtney Mares, Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Officials in Moscow are strongly denying claims that Russian troops committed atrocities in Ukraine. The Kremlin calls the accusations, quote, a provocation and a smear, and it is asking the United Nations Security Council to investigate Russia's evidence that the claims are fabricated. Ukrainian officials say the bodies of more than 400 civilians have been found in Bucha, a city just outside of Ukraine's capital of Kyiv. And joining us now is Ciaran McQuillan, journalist for the Associated Press. Ciaran, welcome. Thank you for your time today. What more can you tell us about what happened in Bucha?
First of all, before I start, I'd just like to explain why I'm wearing this body armour. We've just had an air raid siren here, so it is our company policy to wear this for our protection. Over the weekend, Tracy, as pictures started to emerge of some atrocities which were carried out in the suburbs of Irpin and Bucha. Now, these are commuter towns to the north and east of the capital, Kyiv. There were dead bodies in the streets wearing civilian clothes. That's what our television crews who were there saw. Some of them had their hands tied behind their back. There were bullet holes. Some of them had been shot at very close range. And since then, as we've been able to go in further into these towns, we've discovered more horrendous scenes of buildings that have been burnt out, people shot in their cars. Now, Russia says that all of this is being stage managed to try and create some sort of provocation. But certainly the images that our cameraman saw and the people that he spoke to, the eyewitnesses that he spoke to afterwards, do tell a slightly different story. The cameraman I spoke to yesterday, he told me that the people that he was interviewing, those residents who had sheltered in basements and down inside buildings to try and avoid the carnage that was going on upstairs, they were totally bewildered and they couldn't really realize or imagine why the soldiers, Russian soldiers, had been so brutal to their town compatriots and neighborhoods.
Ciaran, I understand many world leaders, including here in the U.S., are calling for Russia to be held accountable for war crimes. Can we talk a little bit more about that and why this latest attack is really so significant?
Well, this attack is very significant because it is probably the images that will be seared into people's brains, because there is just so much palpable reaction to this all over the world. The leaders of many countries have come out and said that they believe that this is an atrocious crime and that something really does need to be done. And maybe this will move the needle of public opinion as well in the West. So far, NATO has tried not to get too involved in this conflict by sending heavy armament in. President Zelensky, in his last telephone conversation with U.S. President Joe Biden, he asked for heavy weaponry. He said that he wanted to be able to take the fight to the Eastern Front, which is now opening up in the east of this country. That basically is the weaponry that will repel Russian attacks rather than this defensive weaponry that has been put in so far by NATO countries and by the U.S. The U.S. has also committed an extra $500 million, but this $500 billion, excuse me. But this all happened before these dreadful images from Bucha appeared on our screens over the weekend. And Tracy, it's worth noting one more thing here. Ukrainians were worried that more Buchas would be uncovered as Russian forces retreated. And indeed, tonight, 40 days into this war, the Prosecutor General of this country has said that the number of dead in another town called Borodyanka will be higher than Bucha.
Well, Ciaran, thank you so much for bringing this report. We really appreciate it. And please stay safe. Thank you for all that you're doing. When President Joe Biden arrived back in Washington, D.C. today from Delaware, he walked right up to reporters and made a statement before anyone even started asking questions. The president made it clear what he thinks about Russian President Vladimir Putin. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. Usually after he lands, reporters will beckon President Biden to come on over and talk to them and take some questions. Well, today, President Biden, when he landed at Fort McNair, just a few miles from the White House, he went straight towards reporters. He could not wait to speak out, especially after seeing those terrible reports of civilians being slaughtered in Ukraine.
President Joe Biden tells reporters he had one comment to make before starting the day.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him. He is a war criminal.
The president said what's happening in Bucha, Ukraine, where this mass grave was discovered, is outrageous, and that Vladimir Putin needs to be held accountable.
But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight, and we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal.
The U.S. State Department adds,
the world has been shocked by the horrifying images of the Kremlin's brutality in Bucha and other cities near Kyiv.
Meanwhile, big trucks arrive at the White House. Not the truckers' convoy recently seen driving around town. Instead, the backdrop for a ceremony the White House calls the Biden administration's unprecedented actions to expand and improve trucking jobs.
In this iconic American industry, it's getting harder and harder to raise a family with dignity and pride that you deserve.
According to the White House, more truckers have been hired, but turnover is high, and financial burdens of leasing, gas, and insurance force many to quit.
We're going to keep our foot on the gas to deliver for the drivers who deliver for us every single day.
Now, after that trucking event this afternoon, I was able to shout a question to President Biden. He was about 100 feet away from me or so. He was heading back into the White House, so I had to shout pretty loudly. I basically said that Pope Francis may go to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and I asked if the White House would be before that, and the president shouted back, I'm quoting here, for his safety, whatever he can do, he's a fine, fine man, end quote. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, the Senate takes the next steps in the confirmation process of Ketanji Brown Jackson. We're on Capitol Hill. Congress has a packed schedule this week leading up to lawmakers' Easter break, a confirmation vote for a new Supreme Court justice, more COVID relief money, and sanctions against Russia. Republicans and Democrats are drawing up battle lines. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with more. Eric?
Yes, Tracy, this is a very busy time for lawmakers. As you mentioned, they're trying to get a number of things done before the Easter break, but all eyes are on the Senate right now and the confirmation vote of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, possibly making her the first African-American woman to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, Democrats continue to express criticism against Republicans on how they've treated her during the confirmation hearings.
And it just was embarrassing. Really, that's not who we are. It's not what we were sent here to do, to attack other people and just try and tear them down, and I'm not going to be part of that. I think she's extremely well qualified, and I think she'll be an exemplary judge.
While Catholic Senator Joe Manchin is on board, Judiciary Committee Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is a no vote, despite backing her appointment to the prestigious D.C. Circuit Court last year.
My decision is based upon her record of judicial activism, flawed sentencing methodology regarding child pornography cases, and a belief Judge Jackson will not be deterred by the plain meaning of the law when it comes to liberal causes.
A full Senate vote is expected later this week. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi wants to get a new COVID relief bill passed, which right now sits at nearly $10 billion in spending. She predicts current money will run out early this summer.
This is shameful. And we have to get the money. It's not going to last this past probably June 1st.
But Republican Senator Mike Braun tells EWTN News Nightly there's still a lot of unused COVID money.
When you take what was in the original care package, and especially their $2 trillion grab bag, that only about 10% was aimed at COVID, there are all kinds of funds out there that are unspent.
Also, talks continue on a bill to strip Russia's trade status, imposing higher tariffs on Russian goods and restrict their ability to borrow money. And I've learned within the past hour that a vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee for the U.S. Supreme Court nominee has been delayed. That is because Senator Alex Padilla of California, a Democrat, has not been able to get a flight back here to Washington, D.C. from California. We'll continue to follow the latest developments. Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
In China, Shanghai says its coronavirus restrictions will continue to be enforced, even though the lockdowns were scheduled to end tomorrow. This comes as the New York Times reports that hospitals in Shanghai are isolating young children in a different location from their parents. One woman who was separated from her 2-year-old daughter for several days with no direct contact called the situation totally inhumane. And joining us now is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, always great to see you. Thanks so much. First off, I want to get your reaction to these reports of young children being separated from their parents in Shanghai.
Yeah, this is inhuman. And it's also not only 2-year-old children, it's also children who are breastfeeding. This is totalitarianism. This is China's communist regime. So we shouldn't be surprised. They do this in a number of contexts, and certainly with COVID-19, these protection measures really don't make sense anymore. They're more about the control of people. And the Chinese people are across the country are now starting to demonstrate, as they are in Shanghai. They just will not put up with this.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how traumatic it must be for those children. Also, you know, the city announced it's extending its timeline for COVID restrictions on its 26 million residents. What more do you know about the situation there? And also, more on your thoughts when it comes to this mitigation strategy.
There was supposed to be a 2-phase lockdown, one for the eastern part of Shanghai and then for the western part, 5 days apiece. But there are some people in that city who have now been locked down for about 17 or 18 days, and the whole city resembles a ghost town because it no longer is a 2-phase operation. The Communist Party has made the number of infections and deaths in China a test of regime legitimacy. Because if you go back to early 2020, they were criticizing the U.S., saying that our infections and deaths showed the failures of democracy and that communism was superior. Now the regime is deathly afraid because each case represents a mortal threat to the regime.
Yeah, and Gordon, as you know, I mean, Shanghai is the busiest shipping port in the world. The city also produces things like semiconductors, electronics, and cars. That said, you know, what do you think the economic ramifications of this extended lockdown will be for China and also the world?
Well, certainly it is going to cause logistic backlogs. Communist Party propaganda says that the port is operating normally. That is belied by a number of other reports talking about problems in logistics in and around Shanghai. Also, it's not just the port, it's the truckers and the river traffic leading up to the port area. So I think that this is going to knock a couple percentage points off of China's GDP. Because remember, it's not just Shanghai, Tracy. It's Shenzhen, it's Jilin province, and it's across the country. So right now, Beijing has no defenses against disease except for isolation. And isolation undermines economic growth, of course.
Yeah, and Gordon, on a different note, in Hong Kong, Carrie Lam has announced that she will not be seeking a second term as leader of that city, citing family reasons. I'd like to get your thoughts on that and what the future leadership of Hong Kong may look like.
Well, there will be the election committee, which is Beijing dominated, will pick her successor. But this is perhaps the toughest job in the world to succeed because you've got two constituencies. You've got hardliners in Beijing and you got the people in Hong Kong. Now, Beijing sets the tone, which means that your chief executive of the city is always going to be deeply unpopular. And all of her predecessors have been deeply unpopular. So I'm no surprise that she's not getting a second term. This is a job that is just impossible.
Yeah. We have probably about 30 seconds or so left, but curious, what are you following right now? What are you looking at?
I'm actually looking at China's support for Russia. I mean, especially after Bucha, I don't think that Beijing is going to pivot. They're going to support Putin because Putin is bleeding the United States and the West, and that's good enough for Xi Jinping. So we're seeing an atrocity committing regime in Moscow being supported by another atrocity committing regime in Beijing.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Gordon, thanks so much. Always great to have you on.
Thanks, Tracy.
Up next, a look at the state of tourism in the Holy Land as Holy Week draws closer. Plus, why the faithful in one Latin American country credits a saint for the healing of pets. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is affirming marriage as a covenant between one man and one woman. A top Mormon leader says its doctrine opposes so-called same-sex marriage. A weekend conference also addressed cultural trends to redefine human gender. The church position opposes pressure to alter or ignore the uniqueness of men and women. Well, the Holy See has announced the next Bishop of Columbus, Ohio. Pope Francis appointed Father Earl Fernandez to succeed Bishop Robert Brennan, who now leads the Diocese of Brooklyn. A native of Toledo, the bishop-elect becomes the first son of immigrants from India to lead a U.S. diocese. His installation is set for May 31st. Pakistan is in political turmoil after its prime minister dissolves the country's parliament. The announcement by the Deputy Speaker of the House canceled a no-confidence vote against Prime Minister Imran Khan. In a speech, Khan accused the U.S. of attempting to oust him. Now, Pakistan's top court must decide whether the call for new elections is legal. Meanwhile, in Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban has declared an electoral victory.
Magyarország mindenek előtt. Hajrá Magyarország! Hajrá magyarok!
Addressing supporters in Budapest last night, Orban proclaimed God above us all, adding, "Go Hungary." Early results show a 53% majority for Orban compared with 34% for the opposition party. Orban is now poised for a fourth term as prime minister. In Jerusalem, Easter is typically a peak tour season, but this year one local tour guide is hoping for a rebound after 2 years of coronavirus-related shutdowns.
I feel that something in the old city is going back to normal life.
The Holy Week is still expected to be relatively quiet. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem attracts many pilgrims. The basilica dates to the 12th century and is believed to be the site of Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. And finally tonight, the faithful in Nicaragua visit the Church of Santa Maria Magdalena to express thanks to the intercession of St. Lazarus for healing pets who have been sick. The church in the city of Messiah welcomed hundreds of pets. Many were dressed in hats and bows, dresses, and even ballet outfits. Their owners brought them in for prayer before St. Lazarus to request good health and to give thanks for the pets who have been healed. Adorable. Oh, we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.